So shifting gears from there, one of the greatest advantages of the LTR network is the chance to build on information that has been collected over the past 4 decades and more. When you need a sitemap to find your plots or find plots that were created 30 years ago, it's probably there because an information manager created it and uploaded and made it available. When you need a species list or you need to know how much organic matter there is in various soils, it probably exists already. But taking advantage of all that prior work also entails a responsibility to document and share your data so it can be used by future investigators in cross-site syntheses and modeling and comparisons. The LTER network has a system for managing data that's evolved over the past 4 decades. Corinna Gries, who leads the Environmental Data Initiative and is a longtime information manager at North Temperate Lakes LTER, is going to tell you about it. Corinna?
Thank you, Marty. I assume you can all hear me? Good. Yes, so as Marty said, LTR information management has a long history, as long as the whole LTR program. It was one of the very first NSF programs where information management was required, a required part of the research. So every LTR site has an information manager, and we're looking back at 40 years of experience. And when I say that, there is technical experience. So for the younger members of the audience, this means doing information management, doing data management before everybody had access to email, if you can imagine that. It also has a lot of social experience as data management, and then later data publishing was not a very common practice, and it involved a fair amount of kicking and screaming before we got to where we are now. Now we have an LTR data repository, which went into production in 2013. And that houses all LTR data. There are a couple other data repositories that came later, the BCODEMO and the Arctic Data Center, and they are run by specific programs in NSF and generally either replicate or link to the data in the LTR data repository. LTR also has a data access policy, which you can see the link here and read about it. And that too has a very long history. It was one of the very first data access policies that was out there. And many people copied it until by now we have places that actually put out license and license texts and proper ways to license your data. The LTR repository, data repository, merged into the Environmental Data Initiative's data repository, which now is open to all environmental data. So if you are coming from a different place and have done research before, or are moving on away from LTR sites, you still can archive all your data with the Environmental Data Initiative. And I'll get to a few more resources on that in the end. Next slide, please. So these site information managers. Here are 2 photos that are many years apart. The bottom one is in 1995 with one of the early cohorts of data managers. And then the one up there is the last all scientists meeting. And if you do see a familiar face in there, that may be your data manager, your site data manager. So find out who is your data manager and try to talk to the data manager before you really need that DOI for your data, just as an aside. A data manager can assist throughout the whole data lifecycle, and we consider the data lifecycle starting with data collection. At that time, it might be a good idea to talk to a data manager about organization, quality control, how to format data properly. And there are different opinions. You may even want to talk to them before you go out to collect data. But certainly afterwards and looking at data together is always very helpful. Data managers also can help with data discovery. So as Marty said, every LTR site has a wealth of long-term data where a short-term research project may just really fit in well, and the long-term data may be used as getting a larger overview of what's happening in the ecosystem. Where the data manager definitely comes in is in the documentation and archiving of the data. So in the data repository for the LTR, we have this concept of a data package. A data package consists of the actual data and then a metadata file, and the metadata file has to be formatted in a very specific way, and that's where the data manager can help. It may also include code like data munging scripts or model code or other references to whatever has been used to manipulate these data. And all of that together then goes into the EDI repository as one data package. Next slide, please. Here are a few URLs that you may want to remember. All our materials, services, and resources are on the environmentaldatainitiative.org. The data portal is at portal.edirepository.org, and email is info@environmentaldatainitiative.org. And we're happy to answer all questions that your local data manager may not be answering. Next slide, please. A few words of where EDI stands in respect to important aspects of data archiving. As I mentioned earlier, we are expecting all environmental research data, so it is not limited to LTER. Anything else can go into EDI too. And EDI is committed to very high standards in fair, trust, and care. And I'm not going to go into what each one of these letters stand for. How we achieve these things is through extensive and high quality science metadata. So that makes the data findable and then interoperable and reusable. The EDI repository is trustworthy, which means that we are taking care of all the backups and all the management on the technical side. It is widely accepted by different journals as the repository of choice. And we're taking an ethical approach to sensitive data, and that includes the indigenous people's data governance. So we are very well aware of the developments in that CARE project. And if you have any questions, we are happy to help with figuring out how to go about these things. Sensitive species locations, of course, can be masked in EDI, and we are also happy to help with human subject data and how to comply with your local IRB, of which, of course, we can't be part of, but we have experience on how to archive data so that they comply with an IRB. Next slide, please. So where can you find all these data? Certainly on the local LTR site website. Most of them have a data catalog that is searchable in very specific site-specific approaches or keywords and concepts. But then there are the larger collections. So on the left side is the EDI data portal. And again, the URL is portal.edirepository.org, which has all the LTR data plus a few others. And then EDI is a member node of the Data One Federation, and that's on the upper right. That's the Data One search interface. There are many data repositories that are member nodes in the Federation, and all of those data may be found in that interface. And then we're also making the data searchable through the Google dataset search, which is on the bottom right. And that is a lot of data. So finding something there requires probably a bit experience and trial and error and seeing what keywords actually work and get you to the data that you want. Next slide, please. So what is in EDI? I have tried to slice and dice a little bit on what you might be finding there. So on the left side is sort of the sizes of our data. Altogether, we have over 70,000 unique data packages that are available. And looking at how they come, there is mostly CSV tables as the largest number of data sets. So that's the upper left pie chart. Then there are a few other like GIS data, zip files, really small number of just binary files that we don't know what it is or how to read it. Then interesting, all those tables obviously are occupying a very little volume, like in bytes. So the big chunks of data are sitting in the zip files. And then the bar graph shows the duration of the data collection. So just 1 year is obviously the largest numbers. 2 to 5 years, then it's about half that. But you can also see that our gems are sitting in the over 20 years in the last 3 bars. There are probably almost 1,000 data sets that are really long-term and provide so far, until recently, really unavailable long-term views of environmental change. And then there's a Wordle on the most used keywords that are trying to describe those data sets. And I'm happy to report that the LTR core areas are making the cut here and are the biggest, the largest number of being used, which is disturbance, population, primary production, and inorganic nutrients. So the next slide. How do we support synthesis? We as an EDI. So the quality of the metadata is extremely important for reusing the data. And that is assured through automated checks. So whenever your data manager will help you to upload data, the metadata and data will go through a series of checks that assure the quality of those metadata. We also help to archive synthesis data products. And this is an area where we are still a little bit, or not we, but many synthesis researchers are still struggling on how to cite all the data sets that may have gone into a synthesis data product. And journals generally don't like 50 data set citations. And so this may be handled within the data repository when the data synthesis, the synthesis data product is being archived. The connection, the link to all the original data sets that have been used may be made in the repository and maintained there, and the credit can go to the right places. One area that we've been working in and are very carefully stepping into is the analysis ready data. It's a concept that comes out of the remote sensing community, where the remotely sensed data always have to be processed before they are ready for analysis. In ecology, that's a little harder because every data set has to be treated a little differently. And the first really large project we have done is what we call the EcoCom DP, which is trying to format long-term community observation data into a standard format with many data quality assurances implemented into these reformatted data sets. So now about 70 data sets within EDI and all the NEON data sets are available in this format. There is an R package that goes with it to use, analyze, find all of these data much more easily. Currently, we're working on ClimeDB, which was the LTR product for a long time, and we're trying to move that into a different format. And soil data is sort of way out on the horizon, but that may be the next project. As you probably have noticed, that there are synthesis working groups in LTR that are using soil data. Next slide, please. So here's a list of additional resources. Of course, first and foremost, it's the local LTR site information manager that should be your first stop for any kind of questions. But as I said earlier, if you are moving into the LTR and have already data from earlier theses or projects, we're happy to help. And there's EDI personnel, EDI data managers that can do about the same thing as your local information manager, except knowing very specific, site-specific information. EDI has a website with a number of resources on there. We run webinars, and we have a very simple EML metadata editor. So for all those people who want to do it themselves, there is a lot of help out there. We run an EDI data fellowship program. That's a summer program where people can apply to work with mostly certain field sites. Sometimes it's OBFS field stations that in pre-COVID times would host a data fellow. And then the fellows would help to archive at least one data set after going through a training that is run by EDI. We're currently running a distributed graduate seminar that is conducted at 3 different LTR sites, sort of as a pilot. If this is successful, we will expand that to other LTR sites as well. And we're participating in the data help desks at national conferences where anybody can come and talk to us. And I think that's it. And we're moving on to meet your colleagues.